The Spin-off Podcast Network.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Hello, this is Gone by Lunchtime. My name is Toby Manhire. To my left, Annabelle Mather.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Ben Thomas is piping in from Wellington, where he has a feature wall to his left. And Tiahi Butler is with us again.
Tēnā koutou.
Making magic, as he was in recent days in Waitangi with a spin-off team featuring Liam Lyric and Anna. They produced a Gone by Lunchtime bonus thing, which is very cool, among other reasons, because Tiahi managed to summon dolphins, which is a power he has.
Yeah, we recorded on the beach.
Yeah.
There were dolphins.
Cowboys.
There were cowboys riding horses, drinking Coronas.
Sounds like an NRL contest.
Do you think you and Ben are going to make it up there next year?
Maybe.
We should record one up there.
Yeah, I'm up for it.
No, it'd be a danger. If you summon dolphins, Toby's low sonorous rumble would create a mass whale beaching.
Yeah.
On the as they'd be drawn towards these sounds.
Do you think we jinxed pilot whales by calling them pilot whales? Maybe we should
like
have
a survey ship from the New Zealand Navy.
Yeah. Maybe we should have called them bewildered whales, and then they would poor things, eh?
Yeah, cautious whales.
Cautious whales. That's beautiful.
We'll come back to talk about Waitangi in a bit, but let's start off in the Pacific. There's been a bit of a contretemps in recent days. If you'd been asked before the election which Mr. Brown Winston Peters would get into a squabble with in this term, you would have probably gone Wayne, then Simeon. Turns out it's Mark Brown, Prime Minister of the Cook
I actually
Islands.
wouldn't have gone Wayne Brown.
You wouldn't have gone Wayne Brown?
No, because he's friends with Shane.
Okay.
Oh yeah, they're good. The Manganui, old school.
Okay. So would you have picked Mark Brown? Mark Brown and Wayne Winston Peters have had a falling out of sorts insofar as Mark Brown is going to China today for a 4-day trip to sign what is called a Joint Action Plan for a Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. And Winston Peters and the MFAT people are cross because they don't feel as though the Cook Islands have properly consulted about this new agreement. There is a particular constitutional arrangement, which is called free association with the realm of New Zealand. Cook Islands, which is a place you've been a lot of research.
It's a little bit funny when our government complains about not being consulted with, eh?
Yeah.
Oh, that sucks for you. Does it feel different?
And there are certain obligations to consult. There are some dispute about quite what that what that particular clause means or how it's interpreted. But the context for all this, of course, is the broader tussle between the US and China for influence in the Pacific. It also comes a few days after Winston Peters was snubbed, arguably, by Kiribati when they decided that they would only put up their 2IC for a catch-up with him. So he cancelled the trip there. There's also been a bit of a spat about passports in the Cook Islands, where they had been talked about having the moment they have New Zealand passports there, and there was suggestion there would be a Cook Islands passport, and then New Zealand said, if you do that, then you will have to forego your New Zealand passport. So they shelved that plan. Anyway, it does seem there's been a lot of praise from us and others, Annabelle, on Winston Peters' diplomatic efforts. Is this something that does this reflect a shortcoming or a miss or a failure on the part of Winston Peters or the Foreign Affairs establishment, or is this just the Cook Islands going their own way?
I don't think this is necessarily about Winston Peters or necessarily a critique of his performance so far. I think this is what we can expect to see, given that Australia, New Zealand, and particularly the US have really not done a good job at managing their relationships with their Pacific partners. And I think, what we've just seen happen in the US with USAID, pulling the pin on, all of that funding that goes all around the world, including here in the Pacific, we're going to see more and more countries that have traditionally that have been seen as traditional partners or allies move closer to China. I think in terms of the USAID situation, like this primarily benefits China and their ability to use their soft influence more throughout, across the globe. So I think we can probably expect to see more and more of this stuff happening. It comes as no surprise. Geopolitical experts like myself and Kevin Rudd have been talking about this situation for a long time.
Together on your WhatsApp group?
On our podcast.
On your podcast. Oh, yeah. There was of course the Solomon Islands thing that happened in 2023 was a kind of precursor to this in some ways. There's it's one of those things, Ben, where if you look at it through a particular pair of spectacles, you see this kind of influence that China has, whether or not they'll end up turning into a security pact of some sort. On a really practical level, Cook Islands want some help with a new ferry to get around the islands.
Bro, join the queue.
Yeah, that's right. We can, again, Winston, but there's a reason why they didn't call Winston. Maybe he can do a bigger deal for them. So can we grab an extra one on the go? we can flick you an old one. They're like, no, thank you. I'm going to Beijing. But that's the reality of it, right? That's on a really immediate level. It's like, who can help us out here?
I mean, look, this is the thing, right? Is Winston Peters in his last stint as foreign minister, did repivot back to the Pacific, a strong Pacific focus. That's always been very important to him, and it is part of that kind of strategic tie-in of, who is actually going to control the Pacific and its shipping routes, and its, is it going to be the United States and Australia and New Zealand and what we might, the Western sphere basically, or is it China? And, China has both in a very literal sense, in concreting in, building, islands, in a financial sense, and in a diplomatic sense, just been expanding, at a great pace. And, so in terms of have we done enough for our island neighbours? Historically, I think, the answer is probably no. In recent years, I certainly think there's been much more of an effort, but it's more sort of like saying, well, we're trying to spark up the old marriage. So, we've started doing the dishes and taking out the trash and, brushing out
We
teeth,
gave them a new reef in Samoa just recently.
Yeah, and
a new tourist attraction, the scuba divers.
Yeah, the CCP has pulled up in a Porsche outside with tickets to, to a ski holiday or something. We can't outcompete China financially. Taiwan tried that for a long time with a lot of those sort of micro states in the Pacific, that they would sort of, have in their sort of, sphere, I suppose. And progressively, those have been picked off by, a now, very, very powerful China. And what we're seeing, or at least, the early stages of and very, very fast. Let's see how the sort of, Congress pushing back or legal action kind of, to what extent it allows this all through. But, we're seeing an administration that seems in the United States pretty committed to dismantling the empire. And that's going to leave a massive, massive gap, particularly in the Pacific. Australia obviously sees itself as kind of the regional power or a regional power. And we really are closer to the Cook Islands than we are to Australia or China in terms of determining the fate of this region.
It's really fascinating watching what's happening at the moment in terms of the US and China, and how China seems to be winning the war of using your soft power to influence people. And you're right, Ben, like with pulling the plug on USAID, like what that creates a vacuum, and of course China's going to fill it. But even things like when they were getting ready to close down TikTok and all these Americans jumped on the Chinese equivalent Red Note, and I don't know if you guys saw it, but X was just filled with videos of people who were having interactions with people in China, looking at the cost of their groceries, the cost of their education, and they were, first of all, shocked by what wonderful lives people appeared to be having in China, and why it is that Chinese are living the American dream. They own their own houses. They can, they only have to work one job. Paying for tertiary education is easy. And yeah, it's quite a fascinating time to see how China has recognized how powerful that type of influence can be in terms of winning hearts and minds.
The other thing about China is no human rights issues, no historical blemishes, and I found all this out by searching DeepSeek, which is very useful in informing me about the reality of the Chinese record.
But I think that's a really important point, which is that I think if we go back and look at what was the end of the American century that began with sort of World War, helping out victory in World Wars I and II, I think you would probably pinpoint it to the moment that they realized it was impossible to deprive the American public of TikTok. The bet that the Chinese made in the early 90s was that Eastern Europe and the former Soviet bloc, that the population wanted Levi's and Coke more than they wanted democracy. And domestically, that seems to have been proven mostly true. And there are some pretty, strange stats coming out. For instance, that polling, out of the UK about how younger people, under 30s, seemed pretty indifferent to the idea or the importance of democracy. And, if you, there's various reasons for that, have things sort of stagnated in the kind of Fukuyama managerial post-history period, or, things like that. But, China has been winning parts of the soft power war that normally we just sort of took as read as the territory of the West.
And also, the US is making it easy for them. TikTok is full of videos of people in Gaza being maimed and killed en masse. People, and particularly young Americans, are questioning why their government is sending billions of dollars worth of weapons and bombs when they have, an opioid crisis and a housing crisis and a failing health system and all of those things. And then they look at the lifestyle people are living in China. They don't see, China invading other countries every other day of the week, and it's making them question, does democracy really deliver for them?
So if the US is becoming rapidly more isolationist under Trump, rapidly withdrawing from the rules-based order across a range of soft power, hard power, range of different arenas, what does that mean for New Zealand, given that in recent times, perhaps partly in preparation for a potential Trump presidency, New Zealand has been inclining a bit more in terms of that, I'm going to use your favourite phrase here, Ben, the tightrope, has been inclining more towards its relationship with the US. does what's happening now underscore that there needs to be, or does it place extra pressure on that predicament? And does it mean that there needs to be a kind of rebalancing and maybe making sure that we're ensuring that those relationships with China are intact?
I think we really have to hold tight to the principle of having an independent foreign policy that, where we think about what's in the best interest of Aotearoa New Zealand, and we do everything on a case-by-case basis while also looking at them through the lens of our values of justice and all of those things. I think we're incredibly vulnerable if we decide to put all of our eggs into the US basket, because that's our traditional imperial allies.
Yeah, in a sense, well, we certainly still have a lot to lose from, tariffs individually, from the States, just kind of being caught up in a sort of the shotgun, sort of fire, the shrapnel.
Collateral damage, as Tim Grosser put it on Q&A yesterday.
Yeah, and that was a very good interview, I thought. But the other thing is just the destabilization of the rules-based order, which is always going to hit a small trading nation like us harder. I thought Gross had very encouraging things to say about climate change, despite the US's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, basically saying that the US was decarbonising, but it wasn't doing so sort of at the behest of international instruments. It was sort of, following its own sort of path, which was, mostly based on private enterprise. But it is going to be very difficult. This government, there could be advantages, on the margins. The government has been very actively sort of tweaking, particularly sort of certain visa rules, certain immigration rules as part of its newfound sort of road to Damascus growth agenda. A cynic might say that, I think Nicola Willis was talking about the price of paperbacks at relay stores and airports when she was talking about the need for greater competition. So, if you're unkind, you might say that they came up with the policy on their way back from holiday, sort of looked around the airport, saw somebody on a laptop and digital nomads. But I don't think that's right, because there were cabinet papers. So I think it was, there's more to it. But now Eric Crampton at the New Zealand Initiative is always really vocal about this. We should be using these times of sort of turmoil to, look, let's try and attract, really talented software coders of Indian descent, given that there seems to be some kind of kickback against them in the States. Let's get people who want to invest in a region, not a region, but a country which is relatively, stable and predictable in terms of its regulatory environment. Let's sell our strengths because it is going to be harder to sell on the world stage.
And just to touch on something that, happened in our parliament recently, let's not get offside with emerging markets or emerging partners or relationships that we could grow, such as Mexico.
Yeah. Thank God for Waitangi barbecue party diplomacy, where that's all been smoothed over. If you want more geopolitical conversation, I do recommend Annabelle's podcast with Kevin Rudd, The World Today with Bells and Kev. It's available on all good platforms.
In a way, it ends where it begins.
Very insightful.
Thank you for sharing this Red Baron with us, Linda. It's so tasty, it makes me want to share something of my own. I didn't actually read the book.
Me neither.
I watched the movie last night.
I judged it by its cover.
I haven't read a book since middle school.
I'm secretly seeing 2 other book clubs.
And I can't even read.
I'm not really Gary. He just paid me to be here. Sharing Red Baron pizza can lead to more sharing.
Let's talk about Waitangi. Annabelle, you were there.
I was there.
You were there doing some mata interviews. You got Tama Potaka, Paul Goldsmith.
Mm-hmm.
Who else did you interview?
Maria Meno Kapakingi. We thought it'd be good to talk to her, given that she is the MP for Te Tai Tokerau. So we got a nice half-hour sit down with her.
I'm interested in your general impressions, but also Tama Potaka. I mean, he's got a bit of a tough gig. He's the Minister for Māori Development, I think is the title, but also he is the National Party's sort of spokesperson in chief for matters te ao Māori. And the Prime Minister obviously wasn't there this year. Maybe we'll touch on that in a moment. But how do you think he has managed that task, which is an unenviable one in many ways, and maybe not necessarily what he was expecting or imagining when he thought he might end up as in cabinet when he stood in that by-election in Hamilton?
Yep, it's a very unenviable job. I think that's absolutely fair to say. And, Tama knows that he himself said in his interview that there is severe disappointment or severe concern regarding the Treaty Principles Bill. I think Tama could work on some of his lines or the way he speaks to the difficulties in the iwi-Crown relationship at the moment. I think giving away sound bites like "I'm a kaupapa for the kaupapa" is not helpful to him.
He loves a turn of phrase, doesn't he?
He does love a turn of phrase,
Max tino rangatira.
No, Max Kāwanatanga. But I think using, the unfortunate thing about using phrases like that in the digital social media era is that it's the perfect little soundbite or headline, but people don't stick around to find out the context in which he means it. I believe he means, I'm a kaupapa for the kaupapa of Māori development, of Māori advancement.
Can we just
But
pause
if you
here?
don't know what the kaupapa is...
My kaupapa, turncoat, trader...
It can also mean to be like a servant. But more commonly, it's, used to describe people who you would think of as, betraying or being treacherous or, as you said, turncoat. In this sense, I believe he means it in terms of I am in service of the kaupapa, but people aren't going to sit around and wait for the rest of the interview for him to say that. So I think, his comms team should be giving him a bit more support about crafting commentary that's more helpful to him and better expresses his actual position rather than something so short and snappy that's open to being misinterpreted.
What else in Waitangi? The political porphyry was shorter than it has been in previous years.
I think I checked and I think it might be a Guinness World Record.
For short
shortest
porphyry. Sometimes
porphyry.
you just pray for a short porphyry, but this
They
one...
delivered. 1 hour. It's a land speed record.
And Marama Davidson was expecting to speak from the balcony at Te Wharerenga. Didn't at the last moment, it sounds as though she was told, actually, no, sorry, you're not speaking. She was returning, of course. You also had an interview with her on Mata. David Seymour spoke and had his microphone nicked a couple of times. People turned their backs on him in protest. Shane Jones, I think there were still some people with their backs turned. He said that the Waitangi National Trust needed to buck their ideas up and made noises about withdrawing funding. Well, I'm not necessarily sure that the Waitangi National Trust is responsible for the protest action. Indeed, they're probably responsible for keeping it all pretty civil on the whole.
Well, I think Seymour put the kibosh on that, didn't he? He said
Did he?
that the trust had done a great job with the porphyry and that the grounds looked great, and but that look, he's always on message, right? He said, we don't want to hold, a group of people responsible for the actions of some individuals, and so I think that was just Shane blowing off some steam.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened with Marama. I mean, maybe it was because Te Anau had already spoken, and I think there was a strong desire to try and keep the porphyry really sharp and tight this year. In terms of what's being termed the pohuri, when the woman got up and turned their back on the paipai. I think it's quite interesting because some people are quite upset and offended about it, which is interesting because so many times you hear people moaning about women not having a voice or, all of that on the paipai, which Māori women feel quite differently about. And then when they get up and they perform something to express their thoughts or opposition, then they're criticised for that as well.
Meanwhile, Christopher Luxon who'd signalled towards the end of last year that he wouldn't be attending Waitangi in 2025. Instead went to Akaroa, to Ngāi Tahu, to Onuku Marae. And it was, a lot of people were interested to know whether he was going to use the same material for a third time. Because, when you tour around different places, you can get away. The mistake he made last year was you don't go back to this. You don't, if you're doing, you don't go back to the comedy festival and do the same material year after year. If you're touring, you can do that. Did you watch the speech? Did you read the speech, Ben? What did you make of it?
I read the speech. Actually, it's another broken promise, because I've got a story here from the Otago Daily Times last year about Luxon doubles down on reusing parts of the speech. And I couldn't look up the original because it was the AM show, which is now taken offline with the closure of News Hub. But it said, Luxon told the AM show we will probably be seeing him do the same speech next year. So people can trust us when we say there will be no change to the treaty. And no, it wasn't. It was a new speech.
New stuff.
I would say quite a bit better speech. I mean, look, Luxon seems to suffer from really bad luck with his speech making, because I think I think he certainly likes a rhetorical style that I think is a little freer and a little more sort of traditional rhetoric than somebody like John Key, who's very prosaic, or and sometimes he sort of kind of starts spreading his wings. But I think it's unfortunate that just like the speech apologising for abuse in care last year, this I think was his best Waitangi address. But just as with that abuse in care speech, he unfortunately did it the same day that Chris Hipkins did the best speech he'll ever do. Luxon was speaking either before or after Justin Tipper from Ngāi Tahu, who did an absolute barn burner, who really set out. Ngāi Tahu have got a very pretty, what you might call a pretty traditional understanding of the Crown Māori relationship and the treaty. They don't sort of quibble with the right to govern or any of that sort of stuff, but sort of laid out, where Tino Rangatiratanga sits in that, the history of the relationship and how they see how he sees partnership working in a pretty straightforward, but also, very clear and pretty comprehensive way. Luxon, I thought his speech was very good, particularly compared to last year's. He did sort of default into the kind of stump speech stuff later on, yes, not no, going for growth. But he touched on where there were, where the areas were that iwi and the Crown could work together. He noted,
the big rocks.
20. Well, I think he noted there were 20 fast-track projects that were on the schedule that were iwi projects. And I think it's really important that Luxon continues on this path, but actually can really start to sketch out where he sees what he sees the treaty relationship being. That's why he said that the last couple of speeches where he's like, "This is what I think of the treaty," and it was pretty basic. It was pretty children's book. And it is important, given all of the discourse that's going around right now and the way that this issue has kind of kept its salience in terms of being in the public mind and in the media for a really long time now, compared to, say, Don Brash Orewa, that actually there are some sort of, what I would call, centrist or establishment or traditionalist voices on what the relationship actually is, because right now the discourse is dominated by Te Pāti Māori, who have quite a radical view of how the treaty relationship should be compared to the status quo, and the ACT Party, which has a very regressive view of how the relationship should be. And there isn't actually anyone really clearly explicating, how the Crown and iwi have actually, undertaken the treaty relationship in recent history, and I think that's a big gap, and I hope that Luxon, goes a bit more out on a limb to try and stake out that ground in the coming year.
I think it's fair to say he didn't get off lightly in Akaroa, and it's a bit of a shame that the reporters there didn't pick up on some of the things that were said in the karanga to bring him on, because he got the blowtorch put on him right from the get-go. And then, of course, Justin's very powerful speech. I think Luxon's speech was a very much a once over lightly. It really kind of focused on, well done, Ngāi Tahu, you guys are really good at business and good at economics and stuff, but it didn't really celebrate some of the other gains that Ngāi Tahu have worked really hard to achieve, such as reo revitalisation, kotahi mano kaika, kotahi mano wawata, conservation efforts, any of that kind of stuff. It very much focused just on, on doing business. And it also failed to recognise some of the ongoing injustices in Te Waipounamu. One that immediately springs to mind for me, perpetual leases. My hapu still have perpetual leases in Aotearoa and Mawhera. The tone of the speech is, it's really great that we did the treaty settlement with you. Thanks, Jenny Shipley, for coming and signing that off back in the day, and everything's kind of great. We've got some challenges, but we're all good. But I think it would have been nice to hear him talk about what, some of those ongoing issues are. Of course, as we know, water is one of them, and that was raised by Justin as well. Yeah, so pretty kind of light and tasty stuff, I thought, in terms of his speech.
I think that's true, but I also do think it is good to have the Prime Minister talking about this, the successes of the treaty partnership, and the efforts to settle. Treaty settlements are seen as a bit passé now, but are actually pretty recent and have been a real success, in particularly in the Ngāi Tahu takiwā. It's been incredibly successful, not just for the iwi, but for the whole community. And I think it is important. I think it is really useful to draw attention to those successes, in counterpoint to this sort of idea that say ACT might promulgate that somehow this has been leading us down this dark path towards a worse society. It's not. It's a better society. I mean, I think Tamati Kruger once said to me, about Tuataweta and the return there. People say that Tūhoe are unfriendly to people who come to Tuataweta. Well, how can you be a good host if you don't feel like you're at home yourself, And so, I think there is certainly a place, especially now, for drawing attention to the wins.
Yeah, and the wins are more than economic.
Oh, yeah, 100%, yeah.
On that point of comity, we'll wind it up. Interestingly, Jenny Shipley, I see, is on the list of oral submitters to the Treaty Principles Bill hearings coming up, and so is Ruth Richardson, which is
oh my God, that'll be fascinating.
Could be quite an interesting watch. Maybe we'll talk about some of those submissions in the next time we meet up, because that's been an interesting process so far. Maybe we will.
Maybe we will.
You'll need to tune in to find out. Also live event, Gone by Lunchtime Live, if you're in Tamaki Makaurau, on April the 9th. Then do come along. You can book. The tickets are selling pretty quickly, so, if you are sufficiently tragic to still be listening in the sunset of this particular podcast, this episode, not the podcast as a whole, then you're probably tragic enough to want to come along, so please do. That's all. Thanks, T.I. here. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Annabelle. And thank you.
The Spin-off Podcast Network.